my pleasure to introduce John Markoff of the New York Times.
Howdy. So I'm going to bring everybody out in order, and I guess the order begins with Vint Cerf, who is now at Google. So Vint, why don't you come out first? This is like the dating game or something. It's kind of strange. So, and after Vint, here comes Vint. Okay. I won't introduce Vint. Needs no introduction, which of course is what everybody says. Jack Dorsey, who was a co-founder of Twitter and is now chairman. And our third is Tim Sparapani, now representing Facebook in Washington and formerly of ACLU. So in a nod to Twitter, this is going to be it looks like it's going to be a 28-minute panel, which is, I guess, a good thing.
Hey,
Everything's
is
compressed.
this where we do the monkey thing? Okay, go ahead.
So I've got to begin. Mitch didn't say this, but as a Cub reporter, writing for a weekly newspaper called InfoWorld, remember newspapers? About, this would have been 1982, when Mitch had started his first company, Lotus. There was one of his competitors that had a slogan. And this is my introduction to platforms. This was a long time ago, but as I recall, the slogan, not the public slogan, the slogan was DOS isn't done until Lotus won't run. And that Mitch didn't mention that, I don't think. But we have platforms of liberation, and we have platforms of control. And I wanted to sort of look at this from both sides and try to figure out if there's a way you can ensure that platforms of liberation don't turn into platforms of control. From writing about this for a long time, I have a bit of a skeptical eye, and I tend to look at the platforms that people build with this kind of view that, you remember the game that people played on the playground that started with the baseball bat and everybody sort of grabbed the bat and then they put their hand on top of it, and they put their hand on top of it. And I see these protocols proliferating. It reminds me of that. But enough of that. Let me start with Vint. So the internet, TCP/IP as a case study, were you planning to do anything of what happened?
Well, of course, the whole thing is evolving exactly as we expected it to. We're right on schedule. I don't know why you would even ask that question. Well, you mentioned liberation and control. Let me use that as an observation. When Bob Kahn and I were doing the TCP/IP design, we deliberately and consciously did not attempt to control it in the sense of patenting or limiting distribution of the software or the specifications or anything else. And it was actually a conscious decision made for a very practical reason. We wanted very much for that to become an international standard, and we assumed that any barrier of any kind that would inhibit someone from using it or adopting it would be used as an excuse by proprietary protocol vendors who were doing like SNA at IBM or DECnet and so on to say, well, we don't really need that, our networks work, there's this barrier that we don't want to have to overcome. So making it open was really important, and the consequence of that and the sort of the atmosphere in which all this work was being done, heavily academically oriented at the initial outset, meant that sharing of information was the coin of the realm, and people weren't paying for things except by sharing their ideas. So the consequence of that was a very open environment, and I think it clearly paid off.
What was your mindset? I mean, what were you thinking was possible when you started?
What were you thinking?
And yeah.
We had two purposes. One, we knew that there were proprietary networking protocols, and they locked you into particular vendor products. And we didn't want the Defense Department to be locked into a particular vendor's computers and equipment. We wanted everything to interwork. So we had to do a non-proprietary protocol for that. We wanted it to be potentially an international standard, so we did everything we could to facilitate that. The idea was to allow anyone who could implement a piece of internet to be free to interconnect with the rest of the pieces on a completely open basis.
And the lessons? I mean, so, okay, you did this. This is a case study. what does that experience have to offer people who are trying to replicate the kind of impact that you had?
Well, I think the most important lessons, and Mitch mentioned them in his talk as well, the openness allows anyone with an idea to try things out. And an open network, which is not constraining, in fact, the internet doesn't really know what applications are running. That was a very fortuitous outcome. It means you could try anything out you want to because the net isn't going to stop you from doing that. The side effect of that is to allow anyone with an idea to put it on the table and let other people try it. So Larry and Sergey didn't have to get permission from every ISP in the world to try Google, nor did the guys who did Yahoo, nor did you. In doing Twitter, you just did it. And the whole idea is that people with ideas should be able to just do it. And I think that lesson is absolutely vital if we're going to continue this cornucopia of innovation.
And one last thing, I mean, how easy is it to replicate that to your mind? I mean, how much of this, what you did, was a one-off?
Well, I would argue that we've seen replication of that concept several times. If you look at Tim Berners-Lee's HTML and HTTP design, again, very open, all the standards are all readily available. Anybody who could implement something that would run on top of that was free to do it. And look at what we've got. We've got all kinds of web applications that I'm pretty sure Tim didn't think of at the time that he was doing his work at CERN. So and if you look at the open mobile platforms that Google is promoting, like the Android operating system or Chrome OS, which is to come, all of those are attempts to create openly accessible, easily available platforms on top of which to innovate. And I believe that it's still true today that you can do that. So
how much does that activity, though, get corrupted? When you were doing your TCP/IP work, you were doing it to build a research network to permit scientists and researchers to communicate, weren't you?
No. Let me try to put this in context. I remember, we only have a finite amount of time here.
I'm going to go on.
The ARPANET project was for resource sharing. Larry Roberts led that program at DARPA and wanted the computer science departments that were doing computer science research for the Defense Department to be able to share their results with each other, share their computing capacity. They needed a network to do that. The Internet had a slightly more military motivation, at least when I was running the program. I wanted the Defense Department to have access to computers for command and control, and I wanted it to work in airplanes and mobile vehicles, ships at sea, as well as fixed installations. And that's why we needed the Internet architecture, because we needed different kinds of packet nets in order to satisfy all those locations and still be able to operate in a uniform way. So that was really a Defense Department motivation. It was implemented, however, in large measure by an academic community of researchers. And so they infused the academic perspective on a lot of the design and the organizations that grew up out of it, like the Internet Engineering Task Force.
And so when money comes into the equation as the profit motive, does it corrupt?
This is like PowerPoint, right? Power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts, absolutely. Right? Sorry if I offended anyone. Not really terribly sorry, but anyway. Well, money enters into the equation, and it has several side effects. One of them is, I spent money on this thing, I should be in complete control of it. And that's an understandable perspective. On the other hand, if you ask yourself, how do I maximize my investment, sometimes letting control go, letting other people try things out, actually maximizes things. So at Google, for example, we publicize the APIs to Google Earth, Google Maps, and so on, with the expectation that other people are going to make money out of that, and we're happy for them to do that because it grows the utility of what we've done.
Well, that takes me to, I wanted to quote a tweet that I saw yesterday. Let's not build products for people to use. Let us instead create utilities others can build value upon. That was in 140 characters, I think, and I believe Jack tweeted that yesterday. Could you elaborate, or does it need any elaboration?
Well, I think we have a lot of concentration around building products and what that means. Like, what is the product experience like? Instead of something where we're focused on building a utility like the electricity system, like the internet, that does not fail, that exists, so that people can build their own value on top of that. And that's one of the things that we found with Twitter, our API, our open network and programming interface, came out of a purely practical need. We had one other programmer. His name was Florian. He happened to live in Germany. A lot of the exciting things about Twitter is that it's real time, it's immediate. And we had a shortcode here in the US which would deliver tweets over SMS, but we would not deliver them internationally because it was cost prohibitive. So he had a sidekick in his pocket. He had AOL Instant Messenger, and he tried to figure out how to bridge AOL Instant Messenger, which would be push and right away, to Twitter. So we created a simple 4-line function API, and suddenly he had Twitter in his pocket, and he could update wherever he went. And so it rolled, and then we got this gentleman named Alex Payne, who really embraced that product, that developer community, and extended it. I think what the company has done really well, and Alex in particular, is we've listened to how people are using the network, and we've built conveniences around that.
You're a service, you're a platform, or do you consider yourself a platform?
I would consider us a utility. I think that we are building something that is equivalent to a grid, to a network, and that's definitely where I would position the company's responsibility right now, is to make sure that stays up, that we speak to how people are using it, we make that easier, and we allow for more growth along those dimensions.
So this is, if I could just intervene, this is a message delivery service that needs to be very reliable and also very fast, because you want the real-time nature. That is a utility, and you can use it any way you want. You don't say what people should twit about, or whatever the word is.
Or what they call it.
I think I'm in trouble. We need a beep. Right.
So, but once again, I use a client that wasn't designed by Twitter to access Twitter. So in that sense, you're a platform for them, and they're extracting value from your APIs. But to me, you're a wire service for the rest of us. I guess I don't see the broader vision. And has it started to sort of, the platformness beyond just started to emerge? Are there other examples yet of things where you're going?
Where we're going? Well, where we're going is where the users take us, and it's what people build on top of this utility. I mean, a very simple metaphor for this is if you consider the telephone network, and you consider the phone jacks, and you consider the variety of telephones that you can plug into one of those phone jacks. Tweety is one example of a client that a lot of people use. They are extracting some value from our API, but more so they're building value on top of that and bringing value into the network, because they have an experience that people are extremely attracted to, one that Twitter on the website may not carry for them. It's tailored to a specific user group, and this is who gets into it. So I think there's always going to be room for these various endpoints. And then in terms of a platform and building companies and industries on top of this thing, that's another take. I mean, that's someone like actually using the service more as message passing, maybe potentially putting some automated bots or utilities on that actually uses purely the communication aspect, purely the status update aspect of the service, rather than just as a consumer endpoint. So
that IRC is used in that way, very similar to the way IRC is used?
I've never seen. I don't know if I've seen our IRC. I don't know if there's been companies built on top of IRC.
Botnets. I was thinking about bad guys.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I can imagine equipment, devices using this as a means of moving information back and forth. It has nothing to do with human beings communicating with each other, but status information, accepting control, all kinds of things along those lines. It'd be easy to predict that kind of an experimentation.
Right. Do they need to roll out sort of the equipment API to do that, or is it inherent just in the messaging capability of Twitter as it is? Do you need to grow Twitter to do that?
I think it's inherent. I think a lot of this concept came from some of my previous work in dispatch, which was couriers, taxis, and 911 services. If you really consider what's going on there, you have all these entities roaming about a metropolis, constantly reporting where they are and what they're doing. So you have this extreme real-time vertical using very similar software and technologies and constraints that we're using today. The same is true for, I used to work with medical devices. You have networks of medical devices constantly reporting their own state, but also the patient's state to some interested party. And today on Twitter, we have my favorite example of a machine on Twitter is the plants, the botanicals. So this is a plant, a fern that lives on Twitter, and every time it needs to be watered, it says, I need to be watered. And if you don't water it for another 2 days, it says, urgent, please water me. And when you water it, it says, thank you for watering me. and that's it. It's just a moisture sensor hooked directly up to our API.
Huh. Just off the top of their head, can you think of anything our government does that could be they could exploit Twitter in this way?
Well, I think we're making some steps in the 311 services. I mean, you have people roaming all over these metropolises, all over this country, all over the world, reporting what they're doing and what they're seeing in front of them, and being able to quickly amass some narrative or some knowledge from those updates is really interesting. You have a pulse of what's happening in very specific locations around very specific topics. And I think that's one of the challenges of the developer community, of our users, and of the company to build something that really captures that and makes it intelligible.
I learned the value of a cup of tea from you yesterday. I invite people to go look at your Twitter stream. And how was the first pitch?
The first pitch is on the 18th.
It hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
I'm pitching out the first pitch at the Cardinals game, which I'm extremely nervous about because St. Louis Cardinals fans are massively superstitious, and we're playing the Chicago Cubs, which are our rivals. So if I screw this up at all, it's my head.
Tim, could you take on the privacy issue in these? I mean, this is sort of your home turf, but I wanted to ask it in the sense that there's this flowering of transparency. Facebook is the best example in the world of that. People are describing their lives in the most amazing detail. It's wonderful in this context. What if we shift contexts? What if we are not in a very liberal, open society? What happens?
Well, I think people will naturally self-adjust. I mean, one of the beauties of Facebook is we allow people to share as much as they'd like, or as little as they'd like, and people can fall across the spectrum. And they have to find the sweet spot for them. And that sweet spot may change depending on whom they're talking with and when they're sharing and what they're sharing. So we think that we have created something really fantastic which gives users extraordinary, really granular control. And we trust our users. We trust our users to use the tools that they've got and to use them wisely and to know their context. And I think that's really important. And I think it will serve Facebook well, and I think it's a model for where a lot of other companies need to go.
What about the illicit use of information that people are putting up there in an innocent way? I mean, I was just thinking about how does local law enforcement use Facebook as a resource? If you're investigating someone and you can know all their friends, what a great tool for a detective. And I was trying to think what that means.
So, like every company that's a technology company, obviously we get requests from the government for data. We obviously comply and help whenever there's a lawful, valid request. And as a former ACLU person, I take that stuff very seriously. So I can tell you we really scrutinize the request to make sure that the government has dotted at every I and crossed every T. But obviously we're there to help with exigency when there's real injury that could be done to a person in an immediacy of need. But really, the important point to step back and see is that we're all in a new age. This is organic. It's happening right now, and people will learn the proper social mores and uses over time. And there'll be stumbles. There'll be high-profile events that'll be a 48-hour news cycle on CNN and continuous feed about how someone made a mistake and some bad consequence happened. But it shouldn't devalue the fact that well over 250 million people are using this service. More than half of our users are coming back every single day. They're putting out petabytes of data, and there's nothing bad that's happening. In fact, their lives are richer, they're in closer contact with their world, they're sharing and reconnecting with people they've lost touch with. And I think it's an important social moment.
So I live in a city, San Francisco, that periodically fences over the degree to which the net should be a public utility. Why not just build out the internet and make it a service? Why doesn't the city do it? The cost is falling to zero. So I wanted to ask you guys, in terms of these platforms, where should you draw the line? It's so easy to build these and deploy these platforms. Where's the line to be drawn between what's public and private? Why doesn't the government do all of this? What should be done by who?
John, my first reaction, honestly, is that we ought to take a very big tent view of all this. Taking the purely internet paradigm for a moment, the intent has always been that if anyone or anything or any entity can build a piece of the network that's technically operating correctly, it should have the ability to interconnect with the rest of it. So whether that's a municipal network that's constructed using tax dollars, or it's a private sector thing, or it's a federal thing, all of them should be able to interconnect. And so I don't think we should rule out the possibility of public sector implementations, but I also don't think that we should exclude the private sector elements which are already there. Why can't all of those interwork together?
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think that we're doing it real well, and I think the government actually can learn from what our three companies are doing and other companies that are out there in platform. I think that for government to actually evolve, it has to follow the evolution of these platform companies. I really see the world of applications as really the next big thing, and government can learn from building on stable platforms and then providing a whole variety of brand new services and goods to the public, just as these companies are facilitating that for tremendous numbers of developers. For example, Facebook has well over 1 million developers worldwide who are not Facebook employees, but they're building widgets and gizmos that are on top of Facebook as a platform. And those are bringing to the public a whole series of new goods and services that have never been thought of before. And it's that kind of innovative spirit that we're fostering in a safe and secure environment, and I think all the companies are trying to do that, that really government can learn from, and I think that government can leverage off of to provide better services for constituents.
So do you mind if I ask a couple of questions?
Please.
I'm curious to see what you both think about government's ability to make use of the Twitter or Facebook as a tool. I mean, we know that the original view of the web, certainly from the politician's point of view, is a wonderful opportunity to export information to the constituents, and some of them were surprised when it turned out that there was other direction and stuff was inbound to them. But this is a big opportunity, I think, for some forms of transparency, which is something that I think the Obama administration has shown a great interest in. But I'd like to ask the two of you whether you see, in what ways do you see the government being able to take advantage of Twitter and Facebook?
I think this is a really exciting topic for me because I think as the government participates in technologies like this, it really blurs the line between public and private because it makes the public sphere more approachable. We have congressmen, we have congresswomen, we have senators using Facebook, using YouTube, using Twitter, and they're really, they're really making themselves approachable to all of their constituency, and not only approachable, but they're also engaging everyone at the same time. So when you have that approach, that take on it, these whole lines between what is government and what are citizens really starts to blur, so that everyone feels that they have some participatory action in building this government that we're all a part of.
So I really like that. If I could just say, the term blur has this funny, slightly negative, but blend is a really interesting alternative way of saying that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked because we actually have. As of yesterday, I checked last night, we have 23 federal agencies which are up on Facebook.
So what do they do?
Well, they're doing wonderful things, and this is changing every day. It's innovating. What they're doing is they're having, in many cases, interactive conversations with constituents. It really is not just the government telling the public information. It is the public interacting continuously with government agencies. And there's a conversation that's taking place. There's an exchange of ideas and services, and it really is making both, it's making it a much more efficient set of interactions between the public and the government. And I think that's fantastic. If I may, I just want to say that in the last hour we actually launched Facebook.com/government, where these government agencies can go and have a landing page to find the best practices for how agencies are using Facebook as a platform to leverage this service provision to the public and information provision.
Can we use Twitter in emergency conditions? Is it one of the things that's very impressive is the speed with which information can flow through that system, and in an emergency, getting information about where is the fire line now, or where. What URL should I go to see on Google Maps where the evacuation centers are, things like that. I'd love to see some blending of these various applications, but specifically on emergency services. What's your sense?
Well, I would just, I would love to see us rise to that challenge, but I would caution that these technologies do fail, and we have a lot of work to do, and I don't think we as humanity can depend on any one particular technology to aid us completely. We always have to spread these aspects out. But if we are building a utility, then yes, we would like to meet a challenge where we have uptime that can survive a massive emergency like that. But we have a lot of work to do, and that it takes a lot of user support at the same time.
Understood.
Let me ask you. If there isn't a Trojan horse aspect to Government 2.0. I was thinking when there was discussion in the last conversation about a Republican form of government, about the terrible state of newspapers and how we're being disaggregated and how industry's being disaggregated. And I thought, well, why shouldn't the internet disaggregate government as well? Why should we have a Republican form of government when the people can now technically perfectly well govern themselves? I mean, is that am I being too radical here? Is that the end game here? Is that, why do we need a Republican form of government with this technology?
If by this you mean a non-representative form of government, yes. There is a scaling problem here, which I think we can't get past. There's also a depth of understanding problem that is hard to get past. The discussions about the 1,300-page, healthcare bill is a good example of that. There's just an awful lot in there. How many of us have the time to dig deep enough to understand what's going on? And that's why the representative form of government is intended to allow somebody to focus and concentrate on policy. I think our feedback is important, and we have new avenues now with these technologies to do that. But I would still am quite comfortable with the idea that a representative form is more efficient.
Okay. So over and above the collective action problem, which is that essentially there would be really difficult problems trying to get us to do things the government can more efficiently do for us by pulling us together and forcing us to do things which aren't maybe economically efficient. Let's put that aside for a moment. What's really important here is that government has to set clear, stable rules for innovation. They have to foster an environment in which companies can flourish and innovation can come to the fore by giving people consistency of regulatory policy, by setting ground rules and rounding out the edges when there are excesses. And I think that that's an important function that probably only the government can effectively create at this point. And it's exactly what companies like ours need. We need this government, in particular the United States government, to lead. Because the companies which are the leading platform companies are truly U.S. entities. And the lion's share right now of application developers are also based in the United States. And obviously that's spreading around the world. But the government gets to set the rules if it does it well and wisely to allow innovation to flourish, and only to step in when there are moments of excess. And then to round out the edges. If that happens, these companies will create not just 1,000 flowers that bloom, but 1 trillion flowers that bloom. And I think that's really where we're headed. And so that's a function the government has to do for us.
Okay. So we're keeping you for lunch, but I want to ask Vint one last question. We started with you. If you could start with a clean piece of paper, what would you do over differently?
This is assuming I'm not sitting in the smallest room in my house, right? Okay. You've heard that story. Dear sir, I'm sitting in the smallest room of my house. I have your letter before me. Soon it will be behind me. The honest answer to this is that there are a few specific things that I would do. And I can tell you the National Science Foundation and others around the world are beginning to explore exactly that question. The Future Internet Design FIND program at NSF is intended to focus on that. Well, first thing I would do is start with a larger address space so we don't have to make this transition from V4 to V6. That was a big mistake. It was 1977, and I didn't know any better. I thought 4.3 billion endpoints would be enough to do an experiment. And the problem is the experiment didn't end, so here we are. Second, I would have put in a much stronger focus on authenticity or authentication in the architecture so that you could tell something about who am I talking to at various layers in the architecture. Where did this email come from? Which device am I talking to now? This notion of accountability, which has some tension, of course, with anonymity, which I value highly, but those things are elements that would make a big difference, I think, in the way the system works. I would have done a better job on mobility, which we did very poorly, and are paying for now with additional hard work. So those are things that I would choose to do. On the whole, though, it's pretty amazing how this thing has managed to survive for 3 decades or so, despite its various deficiencies.
Thank you. Please thank our platform builders.
Thank you.